Hi everyone, it's me, Mrs. Willis, and I'm here to talk to you about energy capture and food web dynamics. So we're going to be looking at how energy is passed on through a system and what exactly happens within a food web. So let us go ahead and get started. It is important that all organisms get energy and they use energy. And the ultimate source of energy here on Earth is the sun. The reasons why organisms need energy is primarily for the organization in their bodies to grow and to also reproduce. Now, if organisms have a net gain in energy, that will usually cause them to grow. But if there's a net loss in energy, so they're losing more energy than they're taking in, that will usually lead to an organism's death. What's really interesting to look at is to see how organisms actually allocate their energy for all the different processes. And of course, energy needs to be allocated for reproduction. So I'm going to introduce a term to you. It's called reproductive effort. And this is the energy that is actually used for reproductive purposes in an organism and not necessarily for growth. And you might be going, well, isn't that hurting the organism since it's not growing? And yeah, kind of. It is a trade-off. We see this a lot in fish and definitely their sexual maturation. So for example, the orange roughy, it takes about 30 years for this organism to reach sexual maturation. So for those first 30 years, it grows and grows and grows, and it spends a lot of energy on growing. However, when it hits that age 30, the growing slows down and it focuses more of its energy on reproduction. Another neat thing to look at is how organisms maintain their heat energy in their body. So there's two different ways that organisms usually maintain heat in the body. And these systems or these organisms are usually called endotherms and ectotherms. So endotherms usually use the heat that is produced by breaking up bonds in metabolism to maintain their body temperature. So even if they go outside in the hot sun or they're exposed to really cold environments, you'll see that they maintain a stable internal temperature because they're using the heat from these chemical reactions. Compare that with ectotherms. They need to get their energy from an outside source because they do lack the efficient internal mechanisms to maintain their body temperature. So examples might be lizards. They are pretty much classic ectotherms. When they need to heat up their body, they go into the sun. When they need to cool down, they go into the shade, and their internal temperature definitely correlates with the outside temperature that they are experiencing. Please remember the general golden rule. So the smaller the organism, the higher the metabolic rate of those organisms. And that is because smaller animals have a higher surface area to volume ratio. So they definitely have it easier in the ability to intake things from the environment, but also they can rapidly lose heat very easily because they have that high surface area to volume ratio. And so there is a relationship between metabolic rate and your body mass and size. So just remember that smaller organisms, they tend to have higher metabolic rates because they are interacting with the environment more readily and efficiently. So like I was saying, the sun is pretty much the ultimate source of energy in the ecosystem, and energy will flow throughout a system being passed on through these different trophic levels. So let's take a look at each of these trophic levels and talk about how they pass on their energy. The bottom trophic level is what we call the producers. The producers are a very important class of organisms that usually perform a process to take some sort of energy and convert it into a sugar. If that energy source is light, we call them a phototroph. So phytoplankton, algae, plants on Earth, terrestrial plants, They are usually phototrophs because they're taking sunlight and converting it into sugar in the process of photosynthesis. Chemotrophs, on the other hand, these are organisms that use a chemical to convert that energy into a sugar. And so this is called chemosynthesis, not photosynthesis, because they're actually using chemicals. And the most common chemical that is used is hydrogen sulfide. The main organisms that perform chemosynthesis are bacteria that are living in very hostile environments. Heterotrophs, on the other hand, they pretty much consume to obtain energy. So they are eating those phototrophs in order to obtain the sugars from that, and then of course breaking it down through aerobic respiration. And we all remember the equation. You take glucose, you add some water and oxygen, and you respire CO2, water, and of course, that lovely ATP molecule that we need to fuel all of our processes. A food chain is a diagram that shows how energy gets passed on through a system. So at the bottom, we have our primary producers who are taking sunlight energy and converting it to sugar. Any of those organisms at that trophic level are called primary producers, and they usually get eaten by primary consumers. And so that energy then passes to those primary consumers. Primary consumers tend to get eaten by secondary consumers. And so, of course, secondary consumers gain the energy that were in the primary consumers. And then secondary consumers get eaten by tertiary consumers. These are sometimes referred to as apex predators or, top predators of the food chain because there's not a lot of things that will eat tertiary consumers. And we cannot forget about decomposers and the importance of decomposers. They will eat at any trophic level. They will break down dead organic material, and they usually convert it to inorganic materials that are placed in the soil or the water. What's great about them is they really do make important elements available to those primary producers, but those tend to be nutrients and not necessarily energy. The rule of 10 applies to this flow of energy in a system, and the rule of 10 states that 10% of the energy is available to the next trophic level when something is eaten. The other 90% is wasted as heat energy. The energy is not destroyed, it's simply just converted to a form that cannot be used. So for example, if you start with 20,000 calories of energy in the primary producers, and the primary consumers eat those primary producers, they obtain 10% efficiently, and then 10% more, and 10% more after that. This explains why organisms at the top of the food chain, they really do need to eat a lot to be able to obtain the same amount of energy that is found lower on the food chain. All food chains and food webs, which are just more complex diagrams of the energy flow, are dependent upon primary productivity. So if it wasn't for these plants and phytoplankton and algae, there would be no life forms further up on the food chain. Gross primary productivity is something that biologists do calculate when they want to see how much photosynthesis is actually occurring in a system. So if they measure all the plants and the algae and phytoplankton in the area, and they're looking at how much photosynthesis they are performing, they're calculating what is called the gross primary productivity. Compare that to net primary productivity. And anytime you see the word net, it usually means something is subtracted from the gross, as it's called. So net primary productivity is what biologists calculate when they want to see how much sugar is left over or is available to consumers. How much biomass is available for consumers? So in order to get this, they look at all the photosynthesis that's taking place and they subtract it from the respiration that's taking place. And whatever is left over will be the energy that's available to consumers. And so to calculate this, you simply take GPP minus respiration, and you will get the net primary productivity amount. And I'm going to leave you with this last little tidbit here. Please remember that energy does flow through a system, but matter and nutrients are recycled. So you won't see like biogeochemical cycling or cycling of energy in a system because it flows from one trophic level to the next. And because of the rule of 10, you get a loss of efficiency of that energy. Nutrients, however, matter, on the other hand, is different. They cycle and they can cycle through all of the Earth systems. So if you've ever had to learn about the carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, water cycle, all of those will return back to their original place just through a series of steps. All right, everyone, that's it. Take it easy, and I'll talk to you later.